is to decide on the tech stack. On the front end, I choose to use React as the most popular front-end framework, which has a large ecosystem of libraries. On the back end, I originally saw using backend as a service solution, but due to their technical or pricing limitations, I ended up using the tool I know the most, which is Spring Boot. But as I started to build the application, I hit a snag. Setting up REST endpoints, managing two code bases, and trying to make these two together talk to each other, proven to be time-consuming. I realized I actually spend more time making and keeping those two together in sync rather than building the actual business logic. And this when I discovered Hilla. Hilla solved this problem in a very nice way that we're going to explore in a few minutes. And with that, I'm going to switch from my presentation to my browser to show you how to find Hilla on the web. I'm going to type Hilla in my Google search, and this is going to be the first Google result on the page. As soon as I click on this, we're going to be presented with this nice landing page, which tells that Hilla is a full-stack React framework for Spring. It's a web framework that seamlessly combines Spring Boot, React, and UI components so you can build better apps faster. And you can ask, what's in it for me? What if I tell you that you can tell your manager that you're going to spend 3 months building your application, build it in 3 weeks, and take the rest as a time off? Unfortunately, I can't do that because my manager isn't here, and I really would like to appreciate Adam, who is my manager, for coming and supporting me for this talk. But with that, I would like to also show you the URL, which is valentin.com/Hilla. So Valentin.com is actually a company that makes Hilla framework, that also make other frameworks such as Flow, which we heard a great presentation from Lawrence today, but I'm going to talk personally about Hilla. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started by clicking on this Get Started button. I'm going to be presented with 3 options to initialize the project, and I'm going to choose the latter here, which is Hello World. I'm going to choose Edit to Solo to select Hilla. I'm going to leave everything else as default and I'm going to hit Download button. It is very similar to how Spring Initializer works. And with that, I'm going to switch to my console and open this in my IDE. It's going to take some time to load, and once that's done, we're going to see a lot of files and folders on the left-hand side in Explorer. But the 2 of the main files and folders that we're mostly interested in are Java, this is where our backend is going to live, and frontend, this is where our React application is going to live. Everything here is bundled together in this repository. So at this point, I can see that IntelliJ was able to detect the main entry point of this class. And with that, I'm going to hit Run, because it's going to take some time to initialize the application and to load all the dependencies. For now, while this is doing this, I would like to share what the type of application that we're going to build today. And the app that we're going to build is called Developer Favorite Things. But to make things a little bit funnier, we're going to say the wrong things only. Things like scope creep and overnight deployments. With that, but we're going to populate this later on the backend. For now, I'm going to switch to my browser to show how the Hello World app generated by Hilla actually looks like. This is really nice, but we're going to build our application from scratch. And in order to do that, I have to remove a couple of files here. I'm going to remove this Java endpoint, and I'm going to remove this layout, which is going to destroy all the styles. And I'm also going to remove a couple of files from this Hilla file. So we're good here. I'm going to remove all the imports, and I'm going to type Hello World. Actually, since we're in Texas, I'm going to change it to Howdy World. I'm going to refresh that, and we can see that Hello World. This is super tiny. I'm going to increase that size. This is, by the way, state-of-the-art this styling from the backend developer like myself. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to build our application. First things first, I'm going to create favorite things service. And it's going to be a standard Spring service. Now what I would like to do is to create a method that is going to return a list of things. And now I'm going to populate this list of things. I'm going to go ahead and start first. I'm going to say overnight deployments. And I would like to hear a few things from the audience. What do you guys most like, quote unquote, like from the developer experience?
On-call rotation.
On-call rotations, perfect.
Built-in
Feature flags.
Feature flags. Canary, say it again.
Built-in
Canary. Okay, we got a few options.
JavaScript.
We're going to use TypeScript. This is really cool. I'm glad we blended the TypeScript, JavaScript. Okay, we got a few things in here. This is pretty basic stuff. We have a Spring service, and we have a method. In order to expose it to the front end, we will have to usually create a Spring Boot controller, create a handler mapper function, inject it, all that kind of stuff. But Hilla has a very magical implementation, which is called browser callable. And I'm also going to use anonymous callouts because all the methods are going to be protected by default. But what browser callable is going to do is it's going to expose method of this class to be available to be called from the browser. And this is hence the name browser callable. It does not make a lot of sense right now, but as soon as I switch to front end, you're going to see what I mean. And we're going to fetch the data from our API. In React, usually we'll use things like state, so we'll render the view, and you're going to use effect to call the third-party API. I'm going to start with the state, and I'm going to put things right here. I'm going to initialize it with empty array, and since we're in TypeScript, I'm going to say the type of the data that we're storing as a list of strings. Now I'm going to use effect to call our third-party API. Before I do that, I would like to go back to my browser, refresh to make sure we're still good. Okay, we still have Hello World. But now look at this. If I'm going to start typing, I'm going to see favorite things service, which looks like our Java service, but we're in React, we're in TypeScript. So how is that possible and what just happened? In reality, if I'm going to hit this get favorite things, and I'm going to go back for a moment to our Java backend and go to definition of browser callable, it says that for each class, a corresponding TypeScript class is generated in front-end generated folder with TypeScript method for invoking the methods in this class. And this is what actually happens. Based on our Java service right here, Hilla was able to generate the TypeScript code that we can use in our React code. So as every API call is asynchronous, I'm going to resolve it using, it's going to return a promise. I'm going to resolve it using then. I'm going to use method reference to set things. So now we have our state updated. Now what I'm going to do is render this on the UI so we can see. Now, boom, we have our list of things displayed on the UI. This was so simple, but we know that Hilla generated TypeScript for us on the front end. What actually happens behind the scenes? How do these two talk to each other? And if I go to my console, actually network tab, and fetch on XHR, I'm going to refresh, we're going to see that there is actually an API call made to our backend. And the endpoint has this very interesting structure that looks like our Java class plus the method. And Hilla has a full page of documentation, how it generates the endpoint for each class and method. But the nice thing, we don't have to worry about it because Hilla handles all that behind the scenes. Okay, now, if I go back to my console, we can see that we have an error. It says that each child in the list should have a unique key prop. And if you work with React a little bit, you may know that React indeed requires unique ID for each item to render the list more effectively. Usually, the way it's solved is returning the list of objects from the backend where each object has some sort of unique ID. It can be UID or incremental ID from the database. And this is what we're going to do. We're going to change from returning a list of strings to a list of objects. And in order to do that, I'm going to switch back to my ID, and I'm going to go back to IntelliJ, and I'm going to go down here And I'm going to add the record called thing. It's going to have ID and name. I'm going to convert each of the list items into a new thing. I do have a macro reported for this. Now what I'm going to do is to increment all things by 1. And I'm going to change the list of things to be the list of strings. So now we have our backend ready. If I go back to my front end and refresh it, boom, we have an error. If I look it up, we see this long TypeScript error, but we know that we just changed the type on the backend and we need to update the type on the front end. But if I go back to my React code, it now underlines the set things as red. And this is another takeaway. If you change, Hilla has a very nice type safety mechanism to connect Spring Boot and React together. As soon as we changed type on the backend, it automatically recompiled the code and TypeScript code, and it knows that this is no longer a valid type. To fix that error, I have to go ahead and change on the React for the state to be the list of strings instead of being the list of strings. And by the way, look at that. We also get this thing interface, TypeScript interface generated based on our Java code right here. This is pretty cool stuff. Now, we look at how to, okay, let me see if that still compiles. It is, no, okay, I did forget update React code. So each thing has a name and each thing should have unique keyprop with thing.id. Can you refresh that? Perfect, still works, that's amazing. We know how to read things from the backend. Now let's see what it takes to add things to our backend. And again, you would usually have some sort of a database, but we're going to use a memory variable to store our things. For that, I'm going to initialize it, and I'm going to move all the things that we had hard-coded right here into that variable. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to return these things from that method. And I also need to add favorite things method right here. It's going to accept the name, and it's going to return a thing where it will generate ID, which is going to be one number higher than the last ID in our list. And the way it's going to work is I'm going to add a new thing, which is going to get last from our list and increment it by 1. I'm going to add this thing, and I'm going to return it. I'm also going to log it so we can see that it was displayed correctly. Perfect. Now, if I go back to refresh to see if my code still compiles, it does not. Okay, you see there's a method symbol get lost, and the reason it doesn't compile is because I'm using Java 17, and this method is only available in Java 21. Pretty compelling reason to convince your management to use Java 21 because it has this really great method get lost instead of doing some of the old size -1, all this stuff. It has get last method, ID +1, works really great. If I go back, refresh, boom, we are live. Now, the last thing I have to do is to implement my front end. And you know what? You saw that list, and you know this is, as I mentioned, state-of-the-art backend development. We're just going to say that our designer went on vacation, but if I'm going to add our place where we can input data, I need to create input, form, button, all that stuff, which is probably going to be not nicely styled. And for that, Hilla has a set of built-in components. They have a lot of components available for React under the hood. There's a lot of community-maintained components as well. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of these built-in components, which is called message input. It's going to accept, it's going to use onSubmit event prop, and I'm going to use handle add submit method handler. So it's going to accept event type of message input submit event. And in order to get the actual name that we're going to input, I need to use eDetail value. This is going to be the name of our thing. Then I will have to call the backend to create a thing, and because we're already used to Hilla's magic, it's going to have this add favorite thing service, which we just created on the backend. I'm going to pass the name, and I'm going to, because it's going to be asynchronous, I'm going to resolve the promise using await, and for that I need to add a sync right here. I'm going to create a new variable called new thing. And the last thing I'm going to do is update our state by spreading the old things and adding the new thing. So if I'm going to refresh, we're going to see this really nice messaging. It looks great, much better than the list I created. If I'm going to type things like scope creep, boom, we can see that it was added our list. Hopefully, let's do one more. Can you guys come up with one more thing?
Large pull requests.
Large, amazing.
150 files changed.
Okay, if I go to the network tab and I add it here, we can see that it was actual call made to the backend to the endpoint that was generated by Hilla. We got our request with just name, and we got our response with ID number. And we can also see, if I'm going to the logs on the backend, that two of the things that we added were processed by our backend. So this is pretty cool stuff. And we just scratched the surface of what's possible with Hilla and how easy it is to do so. For now, I'm going to switch back to my presentation and briefly talk about a few other things that Hilla has to offer. Hilla has a powerful form validation API. If you add validation on the backend, it's able to generate the front-end code, which is going to enforce the validation where you don't have to make the necessary round trip to the backend. Security. Hilla has a very powerful security mechanism. We saw that all the endpoints are protected by default. It also has built-in session security mechanism, JWTs, and OAuth support. Hilla has a powerful streaming API. This is very useful if you need to show notification or display some sort of real-time data on the dashboard. To make it work, you need to expose a continuous stream of data on the backend using a thing called from Project Reactor called Flux, where Hilla is going to generate the front-end code that can subscribe to this event, where you would be able to render and update your UI. Pretty cool stuff. And of course, my presentation will not be up to date if I would not talk about AI. Hilla comes with its own powerful AI called Vaadin Copilot AI. This is not Microsoft Copilot, this is Vaadin Copilot. It comes with powerful built-in visual editor and natural language assistant. You can tell it to add components to the browser, it's going to add it, and it's also going to generate the code for you. And this code looks great, it's really amazing. For now, I'm going to stop right here and talk about use cases. So we'll talk about what and how, we didn't talk about why. It seems like Hilla has this monolith approach where you have React and Java bundled in one application. But Hilla doesn't try to eliminate microservices nor pushes back to using monolith. It has a very specific use case. We still need those microservices. We still need to have those monolith. We still need to have microservices. We still need to have these public APIs, and we still need to have those separate front ends. But if your API is not public, so think of your internal dashboard or admin panel, for example. If your API is only meant for the front end, this is where your BFF pattern comes into play, back end for front end. If you have a smaller team, or just your sole developer, but you still would like to utilize robustness and production readiness of two popular frameworks like React and Spring Boot, I highly recommend giving a Hilla a try and see what you think. Thank you.